The morning fog rolled in thick and heavy, swallowing the coastal town of Greyhaven in a ghostly shroud. From the small window of the lighthouse perched atop the jagged cliffs, I, Elliot Harper, watched as the sea churned beneath the sky smeared with pale grey. The lighthouse's beacon pulsed rhythmically, a faint glow barely piercing the mist, warning distant ships of the perilous rocks below. The ocean's relentless roar was a constant companion, a reminder of both nature's fury and the sorrow it carried. I had lived here for almost a decade, the keeper of this solitary sentinel. The townsfolk whispered of the lighthouse as a beacon of hope, but to me, it was also a tomb of memories of love lost to the merciless sea. Today's fog was different though, heavier, as if the past itself was pressing in to reclaim its place. Suddenly, a shadow shifted through the haze on the rocky shoreline below. At first, I thought it a trick of the fog, a lingering phantom born of loneliness. But no, the figure moved steadily, footsteps muffled by the thick mist. A woman, someone out of place in this desolate morning. I hurried down the spiral staircase, the cold stone walls echoing my quickened heartbeats. As I reached the base, the heavy wooden door creaked open, and there she stood clad in a worn coat, a faded woolen hat pulled low, eyes sharp yet shadowed by exhaustion. Her green gaze met mine with a mixture of hesitation and urgency. "I'm looking for shelter," she said softly, voice barely audible over the sea's mournful song, and answers about the shipwreck. The mention of the shipwreck tightened something inside me. The wreck that had unraveled so many lives, including mine. I nodded slowly, stepping aside to let her in. The lighthouse's interior was dim and filled with the scent of salt and old wood. The flickering lantern cast dancing shadows on the walls, mirroring the turmoil roiling within us both. She introduced herself as Marina Wells, a traveler drawn back to this forsaken town by memories she could no longer escape. We sat near the hearth, the warmth battling the chill that clung to our bones and spirits. Our conversation was cautious, each word weighed and measured, revealing fragments of pain linked to the same tragic event at sea. There was a silence that spoke volumes. Two souls bound by loss, navigating the fog of their grief. Outside, the foghorn's distant wail cut through the quiet, a mournful sound echoing the ache in our hearts. As the morning deepened, so did our unspoken understanding. Neither of us knew where this chance meeting would lead, but the fragile connection it forged was undeniable, a flicker of light in the enveloping gloom. A promise that perhaps, even in shadow, hearts could find a way. The fog thickened once more as I glanced out the window, the lighthouse's beacon steady against the mist. For the first time in years, I felt that maybe, just maybe, the tides of sorrow could give way to something new. "Will you stay for the storm coming tonight?" I asked, the question hanging between us like a tentative hope. Marina looked back at me, a faint, weary smile touching her lips. "I think I have no choice." And so, beneath the watchful eye of the lighthouse, two strangers began a journey entwined by the sea's endless mysteries and the shadows of hearts seeking solace. Outside, the fog continued to swirl, thick and unyielding, wrapping the town in its quiet embrace. But inside, amidst the soft glow of lantern light and whispered stories, something fragile and precious had begun to stir. The ocean waited patiently, its secrets buried deep, as two souls braced to confront the past and navigate the uncertain tides ahead. Marin hesitated at the threshold of the lighthouse, the wooden door creaking softly as it swung open under her tentative push. The room inside was circular, the walls lined with time-worn panels of oak that smelled faintly of salt and smoke. A spiral staircase wound upward like a shell's coil, disappearing into the dim light above. Outside, the fog pressed thick against the glass, muting the world beyond into a watercolor blur of grays and blues. She stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath her boots, each echo a whispered greeting from the keeper who had beckoned her in. Elias watched from a shadowed corner, his eyes trained on the stranger who had appeared like a sudden tide, unbidden yet somehow inevitable. His voice, low and steady, broke the silence. "It's not often we have visitors in this fog." Marin turned, her gaze meeting his with wary curiosity. "I'm looking for answers," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "about the shipwreck, about what happened here." Her fingers clenched the strap of her bag, knuckles whitening. He nodded, stepping forward, the weight of years etched into the lines of his face. "The sea keeps its secrets well, but sometimes it lets them slip through the cracks. Come, I'll show you around." As Marin followed Elias through the lighthouse, the two began to share fragments of their stories. Elias spoke first, his tone weathered like the stones beneath the lighthouse. "I've kept this beacon lit for over a decade now. It's meant to guide ships safely, but sometimes the light isn't enough. My wife, she was lost to the sea during that storm 10 years ago." Marin listened, the story stirring a deep ache within her. "I lost someone too," she admitted, voice faltering. "My brother was on that ship. I never got to say goodbye." The ocean's relentless rhythm seemed to pulse around them, the lighthouse walls echoing their shared sorrow. They stood by the large window, watching the waves crash angrily against the cliffs below, the spray like ghostly fingers reaching for the shore. "It's strange," Elias mused, "how the sea can take so much, yet leave us with memories that ebb and flow like the tide." Marin nodded, her eyes misting. "Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning in those memories, only to be pulled back to the surface by hope." Their voices blended in a fragile harmony, two souls navigating the turbulent waters of loss and longing. The lighthouse, once a solitary sentinel, now held the warmth of companionship, its light flickering like a heartbeat against the encroaching darkness. As night deepened, the fog thickened outside, a living shroud that wrapped the town in mystery. Inside, Marin and Elias sat close, their stories weaving together like the threads of a tapestry, pain and hope, grief and healing, all bound by the endless ocean. With every shared secret, the weight of their individual heartbreaks lightened, replaced by the tentative promise of understanding. The lighthouse, a beacon in the storm, stood as a silent witness to their whispered confessions and the fragile trust blossoming between them. But as the night wore on, the question lingered in the air: could, to strangers, each haunted by the same tragedy, truly find solace in one another? Or would the shadows of the past forever keep their hearts adrift in the fog? The answer, like the ocean itself, remained elusive, its depths waiting to be explored. The lighthouse creaked softly, a steady rhythm that echoed the pulse of the sea, as if urging them forward into the unknown. And so, beneath the watchful eye of the fading light, their journey toward healing began. The fog lay thick and unyielding over the coastal town, swallowing the jagged cliffs and the restless sea beyond in a grey, damp embrace. From his vantage point atop the lighthouse, Ethan Calloway watched as the swirling mist danced and curled like ethereal fingers reaching out to touch the rocks below. The world felt suspended in a hushed breath. The usual cries of gulls and the crashing of waves reduced to muffled whispers beneath the cloak of fog. Ethan's gaze drifted over the waters where the notorious shipwreck had occurred decades ago. The legends of the lost sailors were etched into the town's collective memory, stories passed down through generations like ghostly lullabies. They spoke of ships swallowed whole by treacherous currents and spectral lights that appeared on misty nights, guiding or misleading those who dared to approach. He knew the sea held secrets, deep and cold, and so did he. As the keeper of the lighthouse, it was his solemn duty to stand watch, a silent guardian against the ocean's fury. Yet tonight, the weight of solitude pressed heavier than usual. The cold stone beneath his feet, the salty air biting at his skin, and the endless grey horizon all served as reminders of what had been lost not just to the sea, but to time itself. A soft creak behind him pulled Ethan from his reverie. Turning, he saw Clara Whitmore stepping inside, her dark curls damp from the fog, eyes alert and searching. She closed the heavy wooden door behind her with a gentle thud, the sound grounding them both in the stillness. "You shouldn't be out here alone," Ethan said, his voice low but kind. "The fog can be unforgiving." Clara gave a faint smile, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "Neither should you, but I guess we both have our reasons." They settled by the fire in the lighthouse's cramped sitting room, the flickering flames casting long shadows on the weathered walls. The room smelled of salt, old wood, and the faint trace of smoke. Here, the world felt smaller, their voices the only sound in the heavy quiet. "Tell me again about the legends," Clara said, her tone a mixture of curiosity and something deeper, more aching. Ethan leaned forward, fingers wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, his eyes distant. "There's the tale of the ghost lighter lantern that appears off the coast on foggy nights, said to be carried by the spirits of those lost at sea. Some say it's a warning, others think it's a beacon trying to lead the living back to the shore." Clara nodded slowly, absorbing the story, and the sailors. "They say the crew of the shipwreck still roam the mist, trapped between worlds. Some say you can hear their voices in the wind, calling out names long forgotten." The room grew colder, the fire's warmth flickering as the wind howled against the lighthouse walls. Clara's gaze dropped to her hands, fingers nervously tracing the leather strap of her satchel. "I came back because I needed to see it for myself," she confessed softly. "The shipwreck, the place where everything changed for me." Ethan's eyes met hers, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "It's not just the sea that holds people captive," he said. "Sometimes the past refuses to let go." Clara swallowed hard, the fog of her own memories thickening inside her mind. "I lost someone there, someone I thought would always come back. But the ocean, it doesn't give up, it's dead easily." A silence settled between them, filled only by the crackling fire and the distant, mournful cry of a lone gull hidden somewhere in the mist. Ethan reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a worn photograph, edges frayed from years of handling. "This was her," he said quietly, holding it out. "My love, taken by the sea. I never got to say goodbye." Clara took the photograph, tracing the delicate features with her thumb. There was a softness in her eyes now, a shared pain that bridged the gap between strangers. "Maybe the ghosts aren't just in the legends," she whispered. Ethan nodded, the weight of years pressing down, but also a fragile hope beginning to stir. "Maybe they're in us too." Outside, the fog thickened, wrapping the lighthouse in a veil of secrets and sorrow. Yet inside, two hearts beat in quiet defiance of the shadows, their stories entwined by loss and the haunting call of the deep. As the night deepened, so did their resolve to face the echoes from the deep together, and perhaps find a way back to the light. But just as the first pale hues of dawn threatened the horizon, a sudden chill swept through the room, and the faint glow of a distant lantern flickered through the fog like a spectral promise. The ghost light was near. Ethan and Clara exchanged a glance, unspoken questions hanging in the air. What awaited them beyond the mist? And could the past finally be laid to rest? The ocean whispered its ancient secrets, and the lighthouse waited, steadfast and patient, a beacon against the gathering shadows. The morning had begun, cloaked in the usual fog, a thick, damp veil that softened the edges of the coastal town and muffled the cries of the gulls circling overhead. But by midday, the sky had darkened noticeably, a low rumble of thunder rolling in from the horizon. Elias, standing on the lighthouse balcony, felt the shift in the air-charged stillness before the storm's arrival. His eyes scanned the churning sea below, the waves growing restless, white caps forming like frothy scars on the ocean's surface. Maren emerged behind him, her auburn hair tangled by the wind, cheeks flushed from the cold. "It's coming fast," she said, voice tight with a mix of apprehension and awe. Elias nodded, his gaze never leaving the horizon. "Storms here have a way of stripping everything bare," he murmured. "Not just the land, but the soul." She turned to face him, the green of her eyes shining even under the grey sky. "I feel like that sometimes," she admitted softly, "like the storm inside me is waiting to break loose." Their words hung between them, fragile yet electric, much like the air charged with the promise of rain and wind. The lighthouse, steadfast and solitary, stood as a sentinel against nature's fury, much like Elias and Maren sought to be for each other amidst their own tempests. As the first fat drops of rain splattered against the stone balcony, they retreated inside, the warm glow of lantern light contrasting sharply with the darkening world outside. Maren wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the fire crackling in the hearth. Elias fetched a blanket, draping it over her shoulders with a gentle touch. "Tell me," he urged, "what brought you back here?" She hesitated, eyes fixed on the flickering flames. "The wreck," she whispered. "It's more than a legend to me. It's the reason I left and the reason I came back." He sank into the chair opposite her, the weight of his own memories settling between them. "I lost someone to that sea," he said quietly. "Someone I thought I'd never have to say goodbye to." Their voices intertwined, sharing pieces of grief and hope, the ocean's relentless tides a fitting metaphor for the ebb and flow of their emotions. Outside, the storm's fury grew. The wind howled like a mournful ghost. Rain pounded the windows, and the sea roared beneath the lighthouse's sturdy foundation. Suddenly, a sharp crack of thunder shook the walls, and the lights flickered before plunging them into darkness. Elias moved quickly, lighting a lantern whose soft glow cast dancing shadows on the walls. "The storm's taken the power," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "But the lighthouse still stands." Maren nodded, drawing comfort from the beacon's steadfast presence. Together, they secured the heavy door against the wind's relentless assault, their hands brushing briefly a touch that sparked a fragile connection amid the chaos. Hours passed as the tempest raged, each moment drawing them closer. They spoke of fear and loss, of the loneliness that the sea sometimes imposes. Yet beneath the storm's dark veil, a fragile hope began to bloom like the lighthouse's beam slicing through the night, guiding lost souls home. As the storm finally began to wane, Elias and Maren stepped back onto the balcony. The world was washed clean, the air sharp and new. Lightning flashed, illuminating the sea's restless dance, and in that instant their hands found each other's, a silent vow to face whatever came next together. The horizon hinted at dawn beyond the clouds, and with it the promise of new beginnings. But even as the storm retreated, the questions lingered: how long before the next gale would come, and would their hearts be ready to weather it? The lighthouse stood firm, a beacon of fragile hope in a world shaped by love, loss, and the relentless tides of the ocean. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean by rain and softened by dusk's gentle embrace. Inside the lighthouse, a golden glow spilled from the kitchen window, beckoning like a harbor to weary travelers. Elias moved quietly around the small room, stacking driftwood onto the fire with practiced care. The flames leaped and crackled, casting flickering shadows that danced along the worn wooden walls. Mara sat nearby, her knees drawn up beneath her chin, watching the firelight with eyes reflecting both its warmth and her own guarded hesitation. The silence between them was comfortable, yet charged with the unspoken stories both carried like heavy stones in their chests. After a long moment, Elias broke the quiet. "The sea has a way of keeping secrets," he murmured, his voice rough but soft. "Sometimes I think it's the only thing that understands what we lose out here." Mara looked up, meeting his gaze. "I came here because I needed to find those secrets," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "The shipwreck, it's part of my story too." From her bag, she carefully withdrew a photograph, its edges softened by time and weather. She placed it gently on the table between them. The image showed a grand ship caught in a tempest, sails torn and waves towering like mountains. "My brother was on that ship," she explained, tracing a finger over the image. "I never got to say goodbye." Elias's eyes darkened with a familiar ache. "My wife," he confessed. "She was lost at sea years ago. We both carry pieces of that night, fragments that never quite heal." The room seemed to still, the only sounds, the crackling fire and the distant rhythm of waves against the cliffs. As the night deepened, their stories unfolded in quiet turns, memories of love and loss, of hope clinging stubbornly to the edges of grief. Each revelation was a step toward breaking down the walls they had built to keep the pain at bay. Outside, the storm had left the world washed clean, the ocean's surface now calm and silver beneath the moon's watchful eye. The horizon stretched endlessly, a vast promise of renewal and possibility. Elias reached across the table, his hand hesitating for a heartbeat before gently enclosing Mara's. The touch was tentative, but filled with the unspoken vow of understanding and shared strength. In that moment, the lighthouse was no longer just a beacon for lost ships, it became a sanctuary for two souls finding their way back from the shadows. They sat together, hands entwined, listening to the ocean's whispered lullaby. Beyond the glass, the night held its breath, waiting for the dawn that would bring new beginnings. But as the fire burned low and the first hints of morning crept over the water, neither of them dared to speak the words that hovered on the edge of their hearts. Instead, they let the silence say what they could not. Hope was not yet lost, and perhaps, in each other, they might find the courage to heal. The lighthouse, steadfast and solitary, watched over them, its light a steady pulse against the dark. It was a reminder that even in the deepest night, there was a glimmer, promise that love, like the ocean's tides, could return again and again. And so they waited, two broken hearts anchored by the same storm, ready to face whatever the dawn would bring together. As the first pale light of day began to seep through the fog, Elias and Mara remained by the fire, their shared secrets weaving a fragile thread of connection. Outside, the ocean sighed softly, carrying away the last echoes of the storm and beckoning them toward a horizon filled with quiet, shimmering hope. What would come next was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, both felt the stirrings of something new, something worth holding on to. And the sea, eternal and patient, awaited their next step. The salty temps of the sea crept through the open window, mingling with the faint scent of burning wood from the lighthouse's ancient hearth. Mara sank into the worn leather armchair, the firelight casting dancing shadows across her face, illuminating the delicate lines of worry etched deep beneath her green eyes. Elias stood near the window, his gaze fixed on the restless ocean beyond, waves crashing against jagged rocks in a ceaseless rhythm that seemed to echo the turmoil within both their hearts. She took a deep breath, the warmth from the fire battling the chill that had settled in her bones since arriving in this fog-drenched town. "I didn't come here to revisit memory," Mara began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But sometimes the past has a way of pulling you back, no matter how far you try to run." Elias shifted his weight, turning to face her fully, his eyes, as deep and turbulent as the sea itself, softened with understanding. "You don't have to face it alone," he said quietly. The room fell into a heavy silence, save for the crackling fire and the distant call of seabirds. Mara's fingers toyed nervously with the frayed edge of her coat. "It's the shipwreck," she confessed, voice trembling. "The one they say still haunts this town. My brother was on that ship. When it went down, I lost him and so much of myself." Her words hung in the air like fragile seashells, raw and vulnerable. Elias nodded slowly, the weight of her sorrow pressing against his chest. "I lost someone too," he admitted, stepping closer as if bridging the physical space would also close the emotional distance. "My wife, she was taken by the sea years ago. The same sea I've been trying to keep others safe from ever since." Their eyes met, a quiet recognition passing between them, two souls adrift, tethered by grief and the haunting legacy of that cruel wreck. Mara swallowed hard, the tears threatening to spill, but held back by the sheer force of will. "How do you keep going?" she asked, voice cracking. Elias smiled faintly, a melancholy curve that spoke of resilience forged in solitude. "By holding on to the hope that one day, even broken things can be made whole again. Like the tides, pain ebbs and flows, but it never stays forever." Outside, a sudden gust rattled the lighthouse door, the wind's mournful howl seeping through cracks in the old wood. Mara shivered, and Elias moved to close the door, the sound echoing like a heartbeat in the quiet room. The storm outside was a mirror to the storm inside, them chaotic, unpredictable, yet beneath it all lay a calm that only time and trust could reveal. They settled side by side near the window, watching the moonlight cast silver paths across the undulating waves. The ocean's pulse was steady, a reminder that even amidst loss, life continued to surge forward. Mara leaned her head slightly toward Elias, the gesture tentative but filled with promise. "Maybe," she whispered, "we can learn to trust again." Elias nodded, his hand reaching out to rest gently over hers. "Maybe," he echoed, "we already have." The night deepened, and with it, the fragile bond between them grew stronger, like the tide pulling two ships closer in the vast, mysterious sea of their shared sorrow and hope, ready to weather whatever storms lay ahead.